Welcome to Financial Repression Authority's Roundtable Insight, where the best fund managers, economists, and industry leaders discuss the key investment issues and challenges in the current macroeconomic environment.
Hi, welcome to FRA's Roundtable Insight. This is Richard Benuli. Today is Friday, November 18th, and we are very happy and excited to have the legendary Martin Armstrong. Martin is the owner of Armstrong Economics and former chairman of Princeton Economics International. He's best known for his economic predictions based on the economic confidence model, which he developed. His website, Armstrong Economics, offers a unique perspective intended to educate the general public and organizations on the global economic and political environment's underlying trends. The mission is to research historical cyclical patterns and market behavior in timing, price, and crisis to understand better and identify potential future trends using an extensive monetary database and advanced proprietary models. Welcome, Martin.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Great. I thought we'd begin with a discussion on your model, the economic confidence model. If you could elaborate what it is, how it works, and what it is currently indicating on the economy, the financial markets, and geopolitical risks.
Well, I had actually discovered a list of panics. It was published in the Wall Street Journal back in 1907 when I was doing research. And it covered a period of 224 years. And there are 26 panics. And so I just, divided the number and it came up with this 8.6. And I thought it was just an average, honestly. And then I tested it back in history, going forward. I mean, it's been incredible. Even Paul Volcker came out and said that there's about an 8-year business cycle. And that's effectively what it is. So it's not based upon even just the United States. Because the list was international, it picked up effectively everything from war. Over the years, I've learned how accurate it has been. It's been quite surprising, actually. And my clients have taught me really how the world functions. Well, back in the 80s, we had a client, Universal Bank of Lebanon, and they had found in a ledger in their basement where somebody had written down the Lebanese pound every day. And they asked me if we could create a model on that. I said, sure, and they sent it over and we plugged it in and it correlated it with the rest of the world. And I thought there was something wrong. I called them. I said, there's got to be something wrong with this data. It says your country's going to, fall apart in 8 days. And very calmly, they said, well, gee, what currency would you recommend? And I thought that was a very strange response. I said the Swiss franc, and 8 days later, the Lebanese civil war began. The same thing happened when we had a client in Saudi Arabia who was big in shipping. And he called and he says, what do you think gold's going to do tomorrow? Iran's going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf. I said, you saying a war is going to start tomorrow? Yeah. What do you think gold's going to do? So over the years, I found that obviously people know in advance. When they started terrorist attacks and things of that nature, the SEC kind of looked at our stuff and basically began to investigate who bought options the day, 1 or 2 days before 9/11, stuff like that. If you're going to start a war or create some sort of event, they typically will buy or do something in advance. Even right now, with all the rising tension between Russia and China, China's selling off all its U.S. debt. If you're going to go to war, you certainly don't want to have assets in that country. And this is part of the whole problem that the Biden administration and NATO have created. I mean, it seems as though they just want war. And all this rhetoric that they keep putting out is very detrimental to the world economy. What they did to Russia was really appalling, in that back in 2014, when Russia went into Crimea, Obama went to SWIFT and wanted them to be removed from the SWIFT system. And they said, we can't do that. You can't turn the world monetary system into politics. And they refused. So that was the right decision. And so they replaced the head of the SWIFT in 2019. And they just do whatever they're told. And the consequence of that is they've already divided the world economy. So China is now creating its chip system to compete. So there's no longer a global economy. We have basically these politicians that don't understand what they're doing. And, they only think about the immediate time frame. That's it. So, I mean, over my career of some 40 years of dealing with governments from Europe, America, Asia, what I could say is that never will they do anything, for the future. If I say, gee, we don't stop borrowing and never repaying, this is going to come to a head in 20 years. Yeah, they say, but I won't be there. So it's not their problem. I'll be somebody else's. So that's our problem that we have in the West. No matter what country you go to, these politicians could care less about the future. All they're looking for is the headlines right now. And so, okay, Russia went into here, so we have to punish them. Do you realize what you're doing longer term? They don't even think about it. And being an international advisor, I mean, honestly, if I had to give unbiased advice to somebody in China, I have to say, listen, look at what they did to Russia. Your assets are no longer safe, because if they get into some sort of a fight or a spitting match with China, they can say, oh, well, you support that regime, and they just confiscate your assets. That defeats the very basis of civilization and the global economy. Putting sanctions on one country versus another is one thing. When you start going after individuals, then, it's absurd. Czechoslovakia is saying that they wanted to confiscate the assets of all Russian people, and to get them back, you had to prove you didn't support Putin. I mean, what is this? This is nuts. So then you're going to start, then what's the next step? The United States, well, anybody that voted for the opposition that lost, we're going to confiscate their assets. I mean, there's no rule of law in this. And that's the real problem.
Mm-hmm. And on the Ukraine war specifically, can you explain how you see it more as a climate war and the link to the World Economic Forum Great Reset?
Look, this is the climate change people are, in my opinion, just insane. They're trying to shut down fossil fuels everywhere without any alternative already in place. And they just think, well, don't worry about it. Somebody will figure out what, afterwards. We just have to shut it down. And that's all they're doing. And Russia is the largest producer of energy in the world, actually. And 50% of their GDP is all energy production. So to them, it's like we have to shut down Russia. And that's really the agenda here. I mean, if you look unbiased at the Munich conference in February 20th, you had the Vice President of the US, Camilla, stand up and say, oh, Ukraine should join NATO. Then the 23rd, you have Zelensky coming out. Yes, we're going to look at acquiring nuclear weapons, and point them at Russia. Putin goes in the next day. Okay. Now, the Belgrade Agreement, most people probably don't know, but Ukraine had more nuclear weapons than China. And so the Belgrade Agreement was Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, turned it back to Russia. And NATO agreed they would not enter Ukraine. And Russia said, okay, fine, you remain neutral. We're not in, we will stay out. So this was a complete, I think, provocation to start this war. I mean, all the propaganda that's out there, it's, oh, Russia, Russia, Russia. Adelaide University just came out and showed that they did an intense study, and all this propaganda supporting Ukraine has been, created by bots, which they have unleashed, all right, on Twitter, etc. So to try and create this image that they are, fighting for democracy, that's a complete lie. The Minsk agreement, which was brokered by Germany and France, said that the Donbass, which is historically always been Russia, all right, and they're all Russians ethnically there, and so that they should be allowed to vote on their own independence. And everybody agreed to that, and that was the deal. And all of a sudden, Zelensky says, no, that's not it. As soon as the 2014 revolution took place, the West installed an interim government, and they instantaneously began the civil war against the Donbass. So we have to look at this stuff, objectively. I mean, this has been, it's been intentionally created for this very purpose. And, I've just put out a book, The Seizure of Russia. And I got a hold of all the declassified documents from the Clinton administration. And they basically, confirm everything that you hear in the news is just all propaganda. That, oh, Russia is, Putin is this madman, and that he is trying to resurrect the USSR and all this nonsense. All right. What people don't know, what's been omitted from the history books, and I was shocked when I found it myself, when USSR collapsed in 1991, NATO invited Russia to join. And that is what sparked the coup against Gorbachev. I mean, you can imagine the old hardliners saw that as a surrender of Russia to the United States. All right. So naturally, they were, just as anti-American as we had neocons that were anti-Russian. These people can't live without hating somebody at night. So they staged a coup. When Gorbachev was in Crimea on a vacation, they surrounded him, and that was it. Yeltsin stood on the tanks in Moscow and pleaded with the military not to fire on their own people. And they didn't. So then the coup collapsed. And then Yeltsin became the head of Russia. So the Yeltsin was actually under attack from both sides. You had the oligarchs led by Baryshnovsky, who tried to set him up and blackmailing him that he had to step down in 2000, or all his corruption was going to be exposed, stealing money from the IMF loans, etc. And so what happened, on the other side, the old line communists, they filed an impeachment motion to get rid of Yeltsin. So he was, between both sides. And all the documents, I've got the phone call transcripts from him to Clinton, and he turned to Putin and he says he will continue the democratic process. Nobody knew him. He was not a communist. He was against the communists, and he wasn't an oligarch. So that's why Putin was so popular there. He had like a 75% popularity rating back then, because they saw him more or less like a Trump. He wasn't a communist and he wasn't an oligarch, and he was the only guy standing in the middle. And the propaganda, oh, he's ex-KGB. Yeah, he was a low-level guy, worked in the KGB, and as soon as the USSR failed, he quit in 91. So it was never like the head of the KGB or something like that. I mean, and he's taken no action in 20 some years to try to expand the USSR. In fact, he's been the only leader of Russia who ever criticized Lenin. He said, oh, he was just a Bolshevik, and he ruined the great empire of Russia, which was not USSR, but the empire of the czars. So he's more nostalgic from that way. And that's been his problem with Ukraine. Ukraine is where the Rus or the Russians actually began. And so what happened was the Mongols invaded Europe and they destroyed Kiev. And so eventually the Rus reappeared in Moscow. So Putin was not interested in invading all of Ukraine or taking Ukraine or anything of that nature. His critics in Russia were basically saying, see what's happened, you should have just wiped out Ukraine. To him, Kiev was like maybe London to America, the origin. So if you look at his communications from initially, he says, we are brothers, don't fight us, etc. He was there and to do exactly what he said, just to protect the Donbass in the Civil War. And that's really it. Now, when you're going to invade a country, military tactics are very straightforward. Like the US in the West, what they did in Iraq. The first thing you do is you take down the power grid, then you take down the communications, then you go for the water supply. And he did none of that. All of a sudden, he's been attacking the power grids because of the criticism from the far right in Russia. And if he doesn't do that, my concern is that they would actually overthrow him, maybe by next April or May. So again, you have all this propaganda from the West, making it sound like if you just remove Putin, the world would be happy. And that's just complete nonsense. Mm-hmm. You remove Putin and we're going to have people that are far worse on the other side. Yeah. So you have to understand what's going on. And most of the propaganda has been created by Ukraine. Even the IMF listed Ukraine as the most corrupt government in Europe, if not the world. Zelensky ran, you can Google it, he was against corruption and he was going to seek peace with Russia. He's done exactly the opposite. The Panama Papers came out and he's got hundreds of millions of dollars he's been stashing offshore. I mean, corruption is the name of the game in Ukraine. All the stuff from the Biden administration, his son hired over, it's all Ukraine. I mean, that's it. And the real story that is not being told is just go ask its neighbors. In Montenegro, the people are supporting Russia, not Ukraine. You have Poland, those a couple missiles he tried to say they were Russians. Now you're starting to have politicians there saying we have to rethink what we're doing with Ukraine. Serbia is for Russia. Everywhere around, they know the Ukrainians. They've dealt with them, and it's not something where if you shake their hand, you got to count your fingers. You got to make sure you still have your arm. I mean, they are notorious that way. I mean, it's even the Russian and Italian mafia are afraid of the Armenian and Ukrainian mafia. Why? Because you mess with the Italian mafia, okay, fine, they take you out. All right. Armenia and Ukraine, they take you, your family, your kids, and the dog. They don't want any retribution from anybody when they grow up. It's quite different. There's a different culture there, and the hatred goes back unbelievable. That's what created World War I. You had to serve to, kill an Austrian who they hated. You can Google and find out, the Ukrainians killed over 300,000 Polish in their, ethnic cleansing. And Poland has come out that, every country has apologized for their actions in World War II. Germany, Japan, not Ukraine. And Poland has come out and said Ukraine has never apologized for the massacres against the Polish people. They don't even respond. It's a culture that is so misreported in the Western press. It's very sad. But I mean, we have employees that were in Kiev and also Donetsk. They don't even want to talk to each other. I mean, you can't bring a bottle of Russian vodka to dinner in Kiev. It's an insult. So it's, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Now, from this initial Ukraine war, do you see the potential of it evolving into like maybe a Bretton Woods 3, dividing the world into two, maybe, Russia bringing in China, and then there's two different financial and economic systems? Or
yes, I mean, what you have here is China's not stupid. If the West thinks that they can do what they did in Afghanistan and use Ukrainians until the last one dies on the field, to weaken Russia, and then they can just walk in and take it. That is a very distorted view. They had the same thing in the Middle East. This idea, they convinced themselves that, oh, the leader is a dictator, and therefore, if we remove him, we walk in and the people will cheer. That has never happened once. But they used that scenario for Iraq. They used it for Syria. I mean, Lebanon. I mean, Libya, the same thing. It's just not true. It's just not true. And then the same propaganda they put out, oh, if we just remove Putin, there are far worse people there in Russia than Putin. And they're going to defend themselves. And honestly, China is going to back Russia. They have to, because they know they're going to be next. You already see, basically Iran coming out on Russia's side. North Korea is sending missiles over Japan. I don't know if these people are blind, but even Turkey may take the Russian side. It's the lies and propaganda from the West do not, go very well outside. And they can tell us everything they want on TV. That's very nice. And keep the people, stupid. more or less like Pravda did in Russia. So this is where we're at. Anybody talks against them, oh, that's cancel them. It's very bad.
In terms of time frame, is there a time frame that you think the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, would make a move like in the currency against the US dollar, like some kind of commodity-based currency, do you see?
Well, I don't think that is really much of a threat to the dollar. You have to understand that the support of the dollar is not that it's paper or anything else. It's the fact that the United States dollar is the only currency that's never been canceled. There are no controls on it. So like Japan, you can't issue a bond in Japanese yen without permission from the Ministry of Finance. So anybody can issue a dollar loan or whatever, issue a bond, whatever. They don't have to go back to the United States to ask. Europe, Britain, they routinely cancel currencies. So 70% of the paper dollars actually circulate outside the United States because it's the only currency that people can trust. Even Canada passed a law and they canceled all the high denomination currency. So it's a little bit more than just what is behind gold. I mean, for Europe or for the United States or you backing things like that is, it's kind of ancient history. The real wealth of a nation that Adam Smith was talking about wasn't how much gold you had. It was the productivity of the people. I mean, if you look at, really, if you look at Germany, you look at Japan, you look at China, they rose from the ashes without gold. It's their people that is the wealth of a nation. And it's the productivity that they can bring to the market, making things. I mean, you look at Germany, it rose from, the ashes to be the #1 economy in Europe. So that wasn't based upon gold or even natural resources per se. They are dividing the world economy, and what will, I think, crack the dollar probably off by around 2028 or so, is the lack of confidence. Once the confidence in the United States collapses, that's it. I've published on the site about we all know how Rome fell, okay? But we don't really necessarily know precisely how, or the fact that it only took 8 years. The Persians captured the emperor Valerian I in 260 AD, and Rome couldn't muster an army to go get him. So, I mean, can you imagine if Biden went to Russia and said, well, we're going to lock him up, that's it, you come get him, and you can't? I mean, then what happened in Rome that undermined everything. Suddenly you no longer saw your country as invulnerable. Then the northern barbarians said, hey, the Persians got away with it, we should try it too. So then they started invading. They built the big wall around Rome in 270 AD. All right, so if you look at their currency, it collapsed from a silver denarius to virtually just bronze, and it only took 8 years. So bull markets are always longer drawn out things. It takes people a long time to gain confidence, etc., but we all lose it very quickly. So the bear market, even if you look at the stock market crash in 29, okay, the low is 1932. It's not like 20 years or 30 years. It's very short, sweet, and to the point. Look at the crash in basically Bitcoin. Same thing. We're like down 90% real fast. All right. So that's what we have to understand. yes, Rome lasted 1,000 years, and it was not like a 747 coming in for a landing, nice and gradual. It was like a waterfall. It just collapsed, and then that's the way the West will collapse very quickly. I think it was Saint Jerome said that when Rome fell, they were still laughing because they were watching the games in the Colosseum, and said, "Oh, barbarians are here."
Yeah.
We're likely to see the same situation.
Okay. And you mentioned equities. Do you see the potential, like for the S&P 500 index, to go nominally below 3,000, or could it happen more in real terms, like against a basket of commodities or inflation?
Now, even if you look at the German hyperinflation, when that was such an incident of the collapse in confidence in government. First, in 1918, you had the revolution against the emperor. So that was the Weimar Republic. And they were socialists. They were actually inviting Russia to please come take them. They wanted to join this Marxist utopia. So then they put on draconian reparation payments, which they could not make. And in December 22, and I think this is very important to understand, you can buy the bonds on eBay. The government confiscated 10% of everybody's assets, period. And they handed you a bond, which they, of course, defaulted on. That is what sparked the hyperinflation. All right, which came in 23. All of a sudden, you lost the complete confidence in the government. You didn't trust anything they said, anything they did. And that's when things get really dicey very fast. All right, so that's probably, we're going to start seeing some of that next year. Our computer is showing at 2023 is a rise in civil unrest. These people don't understand what they have unleashed, really. Fine, it cost me twice as much to fill my car. I'm not starving. However, you go to a third world country and they can't feed their kids. The plus energy prices being up, they're in dollars, and the dollar has risen. So that's why you're seeing, political unrest in Greece and Sri Lanka, all these different places. This inflation is really hurting a lot of people, and the Greens all cheer. I mean, you just look at Germany. I mean, they're quite, I think they're totally insane. I mean, not only do they want to shut down fossil fuels, they don't even want nuclear energy. How are people going to survive a winter if you don't have anything? I mean, it just doesn't seem as though there's anybody with half a brain is even thinking about this. I mean, what happens if you start having a lot of elderly freeze to death because they have no heat? I think you're looking at major civil unrest next year. And these Greens have, only looked at what they want to accomplish and not the transition period to even get to that point. And that's the real danger here. So our computer search is showing massive civil unrest next year. I think that you're looking at probably international war after 2024. And most of what we are dealing with is that these governments are basically broke. All right, the debt has exploded because of COVID. They have never any intention of paying anything back. And I've been in meetings and I've said, this isn't going to work. And they said, no, you're wrong. We're the government. We can do whatever we want. And the people will always buy our nonsense. And that's really been the view. Yeah. So when Klaus Schwab is out there saying you'll own nothing and be happy, he's actually making it sound like he's They're doing this for you. You're the one that has this debt burden. We're trying to help you. That's total nonsense. It's kind of like the insurance companies, and basically when they couldn't, they sell you fire insurance, accident insurance, all this, but they couldn't sell death insurance. So they just changed it and called it life insurance. And then everybody, oh yeah, I want some life insurance. It's death insurance. All right. It was a great play, but when somebody said, gee, you want to buy some death insurance? They thought it was bad luck. I'm not ready to die yet. I don't want to buy that. I might die, And so they just called it life, and everybody brags about how much they got. And that's what Schwab has done, by making it sound, oh, you'll own nothing and be happy. And people are going, oh, he's trying to do this with communism. This is basically the propaganda, because government is defaulting. And if they default, there goes everybody's pensions. It's all gone. All right. So they need war, and they really think that by creating war, they can get to Bretton Woods 2. All right. And then redesign the currency. They want it to be digital. Because honestly, in 40 years that I've dealt with governments, they are never the problem, we are. And they just simply view that if we all cheat, this is it. And if we all paid 100% of the taxes that they think we owe, they wouldn't have a problem. And I said, this is ridiculous, because whatever the taxes you collect, you always spend more anyhow. But to them, you find a $100 bill in a parking lot and they go, you cheated us, where's our 50%? This is just the attitude. And it's why I've said that republics are the worst form of government possible, because they can easily be bribed, and there's no long-term, and they only look at their self-interest, not ours. Mm-hmm. So there's nobody coming here on a white horse to save the day, regardless of their political party or whatever. This is just reality.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the sovereign debt crisis happening, you mentioned there would likely be a flight to Dow equities. Even since the beginning of this year, I think the Dow has outperformed the NASDAQ and the S&P. Yes. But in terms of what you see on the international capital flows, is that flight to Dow equities happening, or will it accelerate into next year?
Yes, I mean, we'll go back and retest support after November, but you have to understand how international capital is different than domestic. All right. The Dow has outperformed the NASDAQ because it's international capital flows. Like when the Japanese were big on buying real estate, they buy the trophies. They bought Rockefeller Center. They don't go down the street and start buying $200,000 houses from mamas and pops. They want the big showcase ones. And that's where capital, major international capital comes in. They look at the Dow. Okay, they're the safest. We know they're not going to go buy stock in FTX or something like that. They're just not going to do that. It's also, you have to understand the way institutions function. We get called in because we have a 40-year track record. You can have the best track record for 6 months, walk in, and nobody's going to touch it, because if they recommended it and then you blow up like FTX, they lose their job. So they want safety. They want something that's been around for a long time and that everybody else is using. Hey, we're all doing it. Oh, okay, fine. But, you stick your neck out and buy something like FTX, you lose your job because of it.
Mm-hmm. On interest rates, you mentioned recently about the Fed funds rate for the U.S. Central Bank, Federal Reserve, running into resistance at 4.75%, and the highest top potential is 6.25%. Do you still see that? And could that also affect the U.S. dollar, maybe strengthening at a peak at some point.
Yes, I mean, I think you you have to understand that central banks have lost all their power. You know, the only thing they have is interest rates. That's it. So, but this kind of inflation is shortages. And Lagarde actually just came out and confirmed what I've been saying, that even a mild recession is not going to stop this kind of inflation. She's not going into it as detailed as I've been saying, but basically she's just confirming, yeah, okay, fine, what he's saying is right. You know, raising interest rates does not make it rain, all right? That's for speculative booms. It's not, you know, when we're dealing with shortages, it's something completely different. And what we have here is, you know, the brain dead decisions of locking us down and stuff like that. These politicians, again, they only look at what, oh, that's, you know, everybody's doing it, so I should do it. They don't ask, what are the ramifications of this? You know, you stop truckers from delivering food. You know, I got emails from farmers. They had to, you know, kill 30,000 chickens because they couldn't get feed for them and they couldn't get them to market. You know, and then they go, oh, gee, there's a shortage. How'd that happen? You know, and then they want to blame it on Putin. You know, it's just absurd. But so, you know, I was actually surprised that Lagarde actually came out and said, well, even a modest recession is not going to reduce this type of inflation. She's at least recognized that we're dealing with shortages and not a speculative boom. So the Fed problem is that if they don't raise interest rates, they get blamed for the inflation. Because the politicians want to spend whatever they can, and then they go, hey, inflation, that's the Fed's job, not our job. So if they didn't raise interest rates, the politicians will be screaming to replace, you know, the chairman of the Fed, and they should all be fired or whatever. So raising interest rates blows everything out, and it's created a huge problem. And that is we've been issuing debt at like 0.25 to negative rates since basically 2014. The vast majority of bonds out there are down. You raise interest rates to 3% and they are devastated. That was the financial crisis in London, that the institutions, the life insurance, they can't afford to buy the long term anymore. If you're in a position where short-term rates are going to continue higher, why would you buy any long-term debt? It's going to be immediately worth less the day after you bought it. Then you had Janet Yellen coming out, and a lot of people didn't understand what she was really saying. But the Fed creates money, the Treasury cannot. But what she was saying was that she would buy in the long term and swap it with the short term. Why? Because these institutions can't handle the long term anymore. But secondly, we've reached the capacity of primary dealers. And the Treasury doesn't sell its debt directly. It sells it. You have to get it, you know, to a primary dealer, and to get one of those licenses, you have to guarantee to buy X amount of bonds. So if they then issue all these long-term bonds, they're forced to buy them, but they can't sell them. Guess what? The primary dealers go bust. So the whole system collapses. That's what Yellen was saying. Without saying it as bluntly as I have been saying, but you know, we've reached the capacity of all this debt from primary dealers. They're no longer big enough to continue to buy this much debt. So it's all just, you know, impacting everything. And so rates will go higher because there's no bid on the long end. And so they will have to raise rates just to try and attract somebody to buy this stuff. But meanwhile, they're shortening the maturity.
And on oil, where do you see the Saudi Arabia-US relationship and the whole petrodollar system, which sort of factors into the bond market as well, right? The whole.
I don't see that as being longer term a viable issue. I mean, Saudi Arabia's already agreed to start selling oil in rubles, etc. I mean, there is no real petrodollar. I mean, that was something that people created as a myth in the 70s. But as I said, the value of the dollar is the productivity of the United States. And that productivity has created the largest consumer market in the world. So China needed American consumers to sell something to. Germany, the same thing. The German economic model was just to make stuff to sell to other people, not to themselves. So they didn't really expand their domestic consumer market. They were always looking to sell to somebody else. That was the whole purpose of the euro. So they could sell their products to everybody else in Europe without currency risk. So that's really, longer term, I think that the Middle East is realizing that they have a problem. And then you have, on top of that, this battle with Russia, which is going to be, you're looking at Syria, Iran, clearly on the Russian side. Libya will probably go that direction, maybe even Turkey. And so you're looking at dividing the Middle East as well. And you had UAE coming out and saying they want firm commitments from the United States. Saudi Arabia warning that Iran, is eyeing them up to attack. And they've this whole nonsense with Ukraine has divided the entire world. Totally unnecessary. They should have forced Zelensky to simply honor the Minsk agreement, allowed the Donbass to go. I mean, Henry Kissinger said the same thing. Henry came out and even said that every president has always invited him to the White House, but not Biden. So, I mean, they want war. This is simply it. It's climate change. They have to destroy Russia because 50% of it is all climate. They're insane. They're completely insane. And they don't look at this at all, and they don't care about the dead bodies on the battlefield. They really don't.
Incredible. Yeah, it's crazy. Final question. Is there like a country or a jurisdiction that is best to move to, given all these, the chaos and just, from a safety perspective or preservation of freedoms and liberties? Is it like Florida, Costa Rica, Uruguay? Any ideas?
Well, I think the southern United States will be okay, because I think you're looking at the United States probably splitting up as well. But they rigged the election in Brazil. They had to get rid of Bolsonaro. I can tell you, absolutely a fact. He was there at Davos in 2019, and they were trying to push him on this climate change. And he turned around and said, "You people are all a bunch of crazy. You're all crazy." So he had to be removed. They had to remove Trump. They have to remove Putin, and they have to remove Xi. And this is what their agenda really is. It's this climate. I think in history, you're going to look back at this and they're going to call it the climate change war.
Very interesting. And great. That's a really great insight and discussion. Martin, how can our listeners learn more about your work, and where can they find more information?
I would say just go to our website. It's armstrongeconomics.com. We respect everybody's privacy, so you don't have to sign in, and we don't sell advertising. So you don't have to keep clicking all these things to get off so you're going to read whatever's there. It's a public service. That's what we provide. And just hoping to educate, as many people as possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
The FRA Roundtable Insight Show is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the show each involve their own unique risk factors which are not discussed on the show. Any discussions among the panel participants or responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the panel participants and do not take into consideration the listener's suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Please be advised that you invest or speculate at your own risk.